After one of the best off seasons in recent memory, how much are the Falcons prepared to put on Desmond Ridder's plate this season? And my guest, Will McFadden, is going to weigh in on his thoughts on the Falcons 2023 NFL draft class.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, and of course, the very humble host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And we want to thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen each and every day. Of course, if you want to be an everydayer and check out this podcast each and every day, make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So, guys, we are going to jump into a conversation I had with Will McFadden of the Falcoholic of Believe in Falcons, formerly covered the Falcons for AtlantaFalcons.com. We'll talk about his thoughts on the offseason as a whole, Desmond Ridder, and his potential to break out of the game manager label, as well as get Will's thoughts on this 2023 draft class. So without much further ado, let's jump into that conversation right now. All right, everyone, we are back with another illustrious guest. He is none other than Will McFadden of the Believe in Falcons podcast, and he's here with us to give his thoughts on the Falcons 2023 draft class, as well as their offseason as a whole. Will, welcome back to Locked On Falcons.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. You know, I always enjoy chatting Falcons football with you, but especially around draft time because you're a different thinker, dude. You beat to the sound of your own drum, and I love it because that's what draft season's all about is just standing on tables and pounding on tables for dudes. And hey, the Falcons drafted a lot of guys you like, so let's dig into it.
Yeah, definitely. So you're right. They did draft a lot of players I liked. And overall, I feel real good about the Falcons offseason. Certainly, I could nitpick some things, which I have been known to do in the past, but I won't do here. But I think overall, it's been as good an offseason as I can recall the Falcons having in several years. I'm curious, where do you think about the Falcons offseason as a whole now that we have the draft in addition to free agency?
Do you feel better because they actually did things this offseason? I mean, it's much easier to feel better about, a team's offseason when they're making moves like signing a Calais Campbell or, bringing in, making a trade for a Jeff Okudah. Like those types of things are interesting, and they at least speak to a organization that I think is willing to think outside of the box to kind of uncover every rock and look in every single nook and cranny for just what's going to make the team better. And that's really been what they've said from day one is the goal. It's not any more complicated than that. If we think that a guy who's out there is going to make our team better, we're going to try to bring him in. It just so happens the Falcons had a lot more resources this offseason to do that than in other years, certainly since Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot have been here. But I like the way that they've used those resources. I think that it was kind of a mix of quantity and quality. I think that you may say the lesser known names, but guys like Caden Ellis, I think that he actually could emerge as one of the better acquisitions from this free agency class because I think the upside is there. Now, I'm obviously basing that on one season there with New Orleans, but he's still young and he's got kind of this weird toolbox of just interesting qualities and traits that I think the Falcons can unlock. And then, the other moves are relatively low risk, potentially high reward. And you look at a Jeff Okudah, who's, 1 year, very little money, but a former third overall pick just a few years ago, still young. Get him in here. Maybe something like that pans out. Calais Campbell, not only the, I think, mentality that he's going to bring to this defensive line that is still in transition. And I'm sure we'll get to that at some point, but it's not complete yet. But he's certainly going to be a benefit to whatever they're building there. So It's a lot of short-term stuff, kind of like they did last year. There's flexibility there. Love the Jonnu Smith move. They didn't do much on offense, but I really like that move as well. So this offseason, I agree. The Falcons have made themselves better. And I think most importantly, they've done that on the defensive side of the ball. But yeah, it's been creative. It's been both quantity and quality. And I really can't complain with their approach.
Yeah, and a lot of their upcoming season, I guess if people look at it as a success, a lot of that will depend on, you know, their quarterback situation, right? So I'm just curious, where are you at with the Falcons quarterback situation with Desmond Ridder? Where are you at with the pieces that the Falcons have put around him in order for, you know, to potentially put his best foot forward this upcoming season?
Yeah, I think that, you know, that investment on the defensive side of the ball does tell me that, you know, maybe they don't want to be in many, many shootouts this season. I think that they would like to, again, everybody uses game manager in such a weird, like derogatory way, but I've never viewed it that way. Like, I think one of the hardest things to do is to be able to manage a game because every game is different, and understanding what it takes to win certain games is a hard thing to do. And I know that we now use it as synonymous for just like, he doesn't have a strong arm, he's not dynamic, all that stuff. But in that sense, I think they're just going to ask Desmond Ridder to really manage these games. He's going to have to be able to hit some of these explosive passes more than Marcus Mariota was last year, but he's not as dynamic of an athlete on the ground as Marcus Mariota was. So I think that that element is certainly going to be dialed back. But in that sense, like, maybe Desmond Ridder is asked to play within the infrastructure of this offense instead of building the infrastructure of this offense around his talents like they did with Marcus Mariota. But they are certainly equipping him with the offensive weapons to kind of be able to do that. Jonnu Smith, really effective yards after the catch player. Like, if you get him on a little slips tight end screen, he can break a few tackles and take it 35 yards before getting chased out of bounds by the safety. Like, they are giving him, and certainly Bijan Robinson, like, they're giving him these options where if he wants the check down, it's there, but it's not just going to limit them to 4 yards. I think that they are kind of giving him a little bit of everything. There's the big catch radius with Kyle Pitts and Drake London. Then you've got the kind of dynamic, quicker receivers, and I'll still include Cordero Patterson in that mix, even though, you know, I don't know how effective he's going to be on a play-by-play basis. I don't want to doubt him, so I'm going to move on. But you've got just different options. And then first and foremost, it's going to be the ground game. You know, I went back and looked back at Matt Ryan's first game in 2008, and I think we all think that, man, he got off to this electric start, and certainly he did. I mean, his rookie season was incredible, but because of that touchdown pass, the 64-yarder to Michael Jenkins, I think he only attempted 11 passes in that game, if my memory serves correctly. It's incredible how much they relied on Michael Turner early on in his career. I think the selection of Bijan Robinson is not an accident in that way. And so now you've got a real two-headed monster there with Tyler Algier and Bijan. They're not going to have to ask, I think, Desmond to do too much. And when they do, I think that he'll be able to step up and perform. I have some confidence in the young guy.
Okay, yeah, I can't recall how many carries Michael Turner had in that first year, but it was like 370 or something like that. I don't know if that would be a good strategy to have one running back carry that type of load, but I think you mentioned a couple of interesting things. You know, the whole Matt Ryan thing I think is notable. That's something I brought up on the podcast previously, where because Matt Ryan's first pass was a touchdown, and we kind of mythologize like his early career. Like you mentioned how little he threw in that first game. His second game, he started that game 0 for 10 with 2 interceptions. And like, I think because we know in hindsight it worked out, we just kind of skip past the growing pains that Matt Ryan had early in his career. And just like, oh yeah, his first pass was a touchdown. And then like 3 years later, he beat the Ravens on the Thursday night game.
Well, and the Chicago Bears
the Chicago
fourth
game,
quarter
that's another
comeback.
great one.
That's what Desmond Ridder's going to have to do. He just needs some of those plays, I think, sprinkled in there. He's not going to have to do it all, but when those moments arise, he's got to hit them.
Yeah. And I think, you're right with the whole game manager thing. But like, what's interesting is like when you look at the successful young quarterbacks, like what they do is manage the game, right? Like those, but we see those guys like 4 or 5 years into their career and like, oh yeah, they're not a game manager. And it's like, yeah, they're not, you know, once they get developed and whatnot, and then they can do all the crazy things. But like I can recall Justin Herbert his rookie year when the Falcons were playing him, and he had a rough game against who I can't remember who they played the week before. And so that week against the Falcons, they were just like, hey, just throw the 3-yard throws to Keenan Allen. You don't have to throw it down the field. Just manage the game, and we'll put you in favorable situations. We'll hand the ball off to Austin Eckler, and you'll just take easy throws to Keenan Allen, and that will work. And it worked for the most part. And then he hit the big throw to Tyron Johnson late in that game to set up the game winner. But it's we just often forget that like these young quarterbacks go through stuff, and the more you can take off their plate, the better it is for them to give them that time that they definitely need in order to become, good quarterbacks that can do more than just managing the game.
Yeah, and I think that you could even make the argument, and going back and rewatching Desmond Ridder's 4 starts recently, you can see where he is almost pressing a little bit too much, right? Like he is looking almost to the detriment of the play for that deep shot. He's got a guy on a deep corner, but all right, it's kind of bracketed. And if you just look down, you've got Drake London kind of coming open on a shallow crosser. Just get that ball out, and now you've got 2nd and 4, right? And that's what the Falcons did so well early on last year, was just put their offense kind of in rhythm early and set themselves up for these 2nd and 3rd and shorts often. That is what they've got to get back to. And it's what Desmond Ridder has to kind of, I think, adjust a little bit about his game. But if there's one thing I think any coach will tell you, you'd rather have a guy who's going to make you rein him back in than somebody that you have to really push to get the most out of.
Yeah. I don't think he's who's my go-to example. Was it Brady Quinn? Captain Checkdown or something. I can't remember which one of those quarterbacks. It was one of those Browns quarterbacks back in the day. But yeah, I think you're not having to worry about that with Desmond Ridder like you are with some other quarterbacks. But we'll see what happens with him, and we'll get Will's thoughts on this draft class, including, what were his expectations when the Falcons were on the clock at 8 if they took the player that he thought they would take in Bijan Robinson. We'll get into that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. And of course, guys, we have more to come here on today's episode. But first, I want to tell you about the delicious snack that allows you to not have to deal with the usual sugar and calories that you usually have to get in order to eat something delicious. And of course, I'm talking about Built Bars, the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar. Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. They're low in sugar, calories, but also have a whopping 17 grams of protein and come in glorious flavors like peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, cookies and cream. And as I've told you many times before over the years, since Built Bar has been a proud sponsor of this illustrious podcast, you can head on over to built.com, check out their limited time flavors, use the promo code LOCKEDON15 and you'll get 15% off your order. But now, guys, you can go to your local Walmart or Sam's Club and find your favorite box of Built Bars. Go to Walmart, walk to the pharmacy section, get a 4-bar box of cookies and cream or double chocolate, head on over to Sam's, run in and grab a 13-bar box of brownie batter puff or churro. You will thank me later. So, guys, here with Will McFadden of the Believe in Falcons podcast, along with my guy, Ovi Mahaley. And Will is here. Let's talk about this draft, get your thoughts on it. And I'm just curious, Will, as you're watching Thursday night last week, and the Falcons are getting there on the clock, were you expecting Bijan to be the pick, or did you think they would go in a different direction there?
I was really interested once, honestly, like in the back of my mind, I kind of hoped it would be Devin Witherspoon, just because that's the mentality that he would bring to the secondary. I think is something that they've been lacking for a little while now. And I'm a fan of something like that. But when he went number 5 to Seattle, I was like, all right, hey, I felt good about myself because I was like, scouted him right. People liked him. He's a top 5 pick. So that got me interested, but it also took, in my mind, a player off the Falcons board. Then when Tyree Wilson goes 7, it's like, all right, Jalen Carter's still there, obviously. Bijan is still there, but like what do you do? Because those two kind of clear, Christian Gonzalez still there, Peter Skronsky, that's all of the guys that we had been talking about to some degree. It's just now -2 that in my mind were maybe the front runners, because I do think the Falcons could have easily gone defense with that number 8 pick if somebody had been there that they really liked. And in my mind, that was Tyree Wilson and Devin Witherspoon. But I understand a lot of people wanting Jalen Carter with that pick. I think that Bijan makes a little bit more sense, even though I think Jalen Carter may be the overall more talented player. But the Falcons value so much the culture that they're building, which every team will tell you that they do. But what they say is that you kind of have to have the discipline to actually then act on that. And that becomes hard when you look at a player as talented as a Jalen Carter, where there are now some of these off-field issues creeping up. You have heard rumblings of maybe this guy had to be, needed a little more hands-on approach when he was away from the facility and away from the team than NFL teams are usually going to provide. So on the flip side, you've got Bijan Robinson, who by all accounts is one of the hardest workers in the program, just a great guy off the field, like very personable, just a real leader. And so they value that highly. The player that Bijan is incredibly dynamic, athletic. He's a true offensive weapon. So as I started to think about those things, it wasn't a surprise to me that they did go Bijan. I think that a lot of people obviously are going to focus on the value aspect of the running back position. But I do believe this team when they say that they view him as more of a running back, I think, or more than a running back. I do think that he's got the skill set to certainly be used in a variety of ways. I know I tweeted out recently, but Deebo Samuel and San Francisco and kind of that role comes to mind is, all right, he can be on the field pretty much any play that you need him. It's not like, but we also have Tyler Algier and we need to take Bijan off the field or Tyler Algier off the No, both guys I expect to be on the field a whole heck of a lot together. And I think that that's what the Falcons are banking on. Like, I really think that you have a very creative play caller, a very creative offense, somebody who knows personnel packages and how to manipulate defenses because of that more than anybody else. Just what this team needed was a little bit more, in my opinion, explosiveness on offense, somebody who could take it from 45 yards out and score and kind of do that more often than not, like have that big play threat that they've been lacking. Kyle Pitts brings it, but he hasn't proven that consistently at the NFL level. I think Drake London is better as that kind of deeper intermediate area, that 15-yard dig route, 20-yard, that kind of area. Bijan is now the guy that I think is the home run threat, and the offense, again, has been lacking that. So for all of those reasons, leadership off the field, but on the field dynamic player who is going to be a big, big wrinkle for one of the wrinkliest offenses in the league, I think the pick makes a lot of sense.
Now, you mentioned the possibility of the Falcons going with Jalen Carter, and obviously, a lot of people have been questioning whether or not that would have been the better selection. And I'm just curious to pick your brain on some of the rhetoric I've heard since the draft, which is criticizing the Bijan pick because the Falcons needed pass rush and whether or not they had adequately addressed the pass rush prior to the draft. And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't really think that this was the strongest free agency class in terms of pass rushers. I think it's very notable that when you bring in the Saints defensive line coach to be your defensive coordinator and the top free agent pass rusher by a lot of reputable, outlets is a former Saints defensive end, and that player does not end up with the new team, then that's probably pretty telling about the overall talent of the group of free agency edges. So I don't necessarily blame Atlanta for not totally attacking the free agency market and bringing in like 2 or 3 of these top guys, because I think certainly we want to talk about value as it pertains to the draft. I don't think the value would have been there for what you were going to be paying for versus what you were getting production wise. So I think the Falcons were kind of smart in going with this a la carte option of, we're going to bring back Lorenzo Carter for a year. We're going to bring Bud Dupree in here. We're going to bring Calais Campbell in here. Like, let's go with a few different options. And then from a draft perspective, like, again, when Tyree Wilson was gone, when Will Anderson was gone, those are the 2 that I felt probably most immediately could at least add a little juice to the pass rush. Jalen Carter, yes, like the Falcons theoretically need to add pass rush, but you look at their defensive line room and it is extremely crowded. And I know that they went with Zach Harrison and ultimately did add another defensive lineman in the draft, but there's just not going to be a lot of playing time to go around. And to drop somebody like a Jalen Carter into the mix after bringing in a David Onyemata. You still have, I think, high hopes for Taquan Graham. You've got Grady Jarrett there. Like, your interior, all of a sudden, you've got a lot of players that I think you want to play. And that creates its own set of issues. And I don't know how much Jalen Carter from day one is going to impact your pass rush. Like, trust me, I love Jalen Carter as much as anybody. Like, I think he is the most talented player in this draft. But I don't know if we're going to say like the Falcons need 12 more sacks. Jalen Carter's not getting that for you as a rookie. So for a lot of those reasons, I kind of think or thought that, especially with the David Onyemata signing, maybe that was a little bit of the writing on the wall for those Jalen Carter hopes, just because it's like they're pretty crowded on the defensive line as a whole, but especially in the interior. So that's kind of where I fell with all of the Jalen Carter talk and how I rationalized it.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about the pass rusher the Falcons did get in Zach Harrison in the 3rd round. Talk about the other players that the Falcons drafted after Bijan Robinson as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons here with Will McFadden. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, guys, and I once again want to give a shout out to all my everydayers that make this podcast their first listen each and every day. Make sure you follow in their footsteps by subscribing on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. But today I'm joined by Will McFadden, and let's talk about the Falcons' non-first round picks. And I'm just curious to pick your brain, whether you want to go through your thoughts on each of these picks or just cherry pick a couple of guys that stood out to you. What were your thoughts on the non-Bijan Robinson picks for the Falcons?
They're growing on me. The more that I've sat with them, I tend to think that probably does happen with a lot of people in the draft. You know, it's like a name that you didn't know or didn't recognize beforehand or didn't see mocked to your team gets called, and you're just like, what the heck, man? What is going on here? And then you kind of like you're like, okay, well, what do we have? Oh, that's not bad. You know, I can make do with that. That's kind of where I'm landing with the rest of the draft. I really think the Matthew Bergeron pick. You know, I've heard since then that the Cowboys were considering him, you know, at their spot at 26. So it's like, all right, we want to talk again about value. Like that's good value then. If other NFL teams considered him a first round talent, all right, you plug him there. He's got, I think, a decent shot at winning that left guard job. Obviously, they'll make him compete for it, but I don't think they draft him that highly just to consider or like just to continue to add depth here. I think that they view him as a potential starter, and certainly in the run game, that is where he'll be making his hay early on. I think he's really good at getting to that second level and continuing to seal that alley and extending some of these run lanes. And now you pair him with a player like Bijan Robinson, who you just give him a little bit more daylight. And yeah, that could certainly pay dividends in the form of a 52-yard run down the sideline. So I like the pairing of those two together. And I think you minimize some of Bergeron's maybe weaknesses in pass protection by kicking him inside. Certainly give the help with Jake Matthews right there. So I like that pick for all of those reasons. Zach Harrison is one that I'm really, really curious, maybe of all of the draft picks that they made, just to see how it plays out. Just like if I could peer 3.5 years into the future and just be like, okay, you know, he's going into year 4. What are we looking like here? You know, like, is he going to be able to capitalize on a lot of the talent that made him a 5-star prospect coming out of high school, you know, that landed him at Ohio State, a program that has put out just incredible pass rushers off the edge in recent years. And, you know, he was at one point looked at as, all right, he's the next one that's coming up. Or is the limitations, you know, the lack of true lateral mobility that you kind of need to be a dominant edge rusher, the fact that he can't kind of collapse the pocket back in towards the quarterback and bend around that arc the way that you need to, is that going to ultimately kind of cause what we saw in college? And it's going to be a lack of production, you know, that he looks the part, that he's got the size, the longest wingspan, the longest arms of anybody in this class, but, you know, just can't really do anything with all of those gifts. Like, I can't get a read on him. So he was a former team captain. Again, like that's something that they value in this organization is leadership. And he's been around a great program. He's going to step foot in from day one and know what to do and look the part and act the part. So it makes a lot of sense if you're going to bet on somebody's upside. I'm just really curious to see if he taps into it. And then the last one that I really liked, and I know I'm just kind of going in order here, but Clark Phillips is somebody else who, like Bergeron, I think they got really good value with him in the 4th round. He's kind of the opposite in my mind to Bergeron. Like we talk about Bergeron's immense athleticism and upside and just like the physicality and the traits that he brings, but you look at Phillips and he's kind of tapped out athletically. He's on the smaller side. He doesn't have very long arms. He ran a 4.5, and that's usually going to like scare some teams away from corners. But I don't know how much that matters on the inside if you bump him into nickel. He does still have some of that versatility, and the Falcons obviously value versatility in the secondary, probably just as much as the offensive line. And those are the 2 positions where I think you most commonly see some of these swing guys, players who can play multiple spots within their position group. So he fits that bill as well. But when you talk about Clark Phillips, it's just the intelligence. It's his read and react ability. It's his diagnosing of plays, of understanding what's coming through both film study and just rigorous preparation in the lead up to games. But also, I really just think he trusts his instincts to a level that you have to succeed in the NFL. And for that reason, I think that I've been thinking a lot about Brian Poole as I've watched him play. Somebody who, again, undrafted, like wasn't considered athletically capable of really succeeding in the NFL. And I thought that he may have been my favorite like nickel corner of the last 6, 7, 8 years for Atlanta. Like, I just don't know if they've had somebody who is kind of game in and game out as consistent as Brian Poole was that rookie year. And I think that certainly, Clark Phillips can be that for Atlanta just because of the way that he plays the game. I think will translate to the next level. So those 3 are the other 3 that I really liked. It's not anything against Javon Gwynn or DeMarco Helms. I just don't know how big their role is going to be. So yeah, the first 4 picks for Atlanta, I'm really coming around on.
Yeah. On Clark Phillips, or on, Brian Poole being your favorite nickel for the last, 7, 8 years. For me, it probably goes back 15 years to like Kevin Mathis in terms of being favorite nickel. Although I was a very big Bobby McLean fan, Robert McLean. So, we'll see. We'll see.
No, it's definitely fair.
Yeah. If Clark Phillips, joins the pantheon of fan favorite nickel corners for the Falcons over the last
long and distinguished list.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Chevis Jackson, he's good. Can he leapfrog Chevis Jackson? But on the Bergeron thing, seen the various reports about the Cowboys wanting him, and that in and of itself is kind of a selling point for Bergeron, because it feels like, when was the last time the Cowboys missed on an offensive lineman?
Right.
Like, it just feels like every offensive lineman they draft winds up, being a very successful player in the NFL, whether it's Tyler Smith last year, Tyler Biotish, Zach Martin, Travis Frederick,
Are people in on Connor McGovern still? Didn't he get drafted by them?
Yeah. Which, I don't know. There's 2 Connor McGoverns, and I don't know. One of them's in New York, and I don't know where the other one is. And I don't know which one is which. So there's the Broncos Connor McGovern, there's the Cowboys Connor McGovern, and one of those guys is in New York now, but who knows at this point in time. But I did like Connor McGovern in Dallas because they used to use him as a fullback, and so that's the keys to my heart. Just put an offensive lineman at fullback. But Will, I really do appreciate your insight into this Falcons draft class, and of course, go ahead and plug where people can find your other stuff and what you guys got coming for them all summer long on Believe in Falcons.
Yeah. So on Twitter, at Will McFadden, written stuff over at the Falcoholic, along with Aaron. And then, Believe in Falcons, just wherever you get your podcasts. Ovi and I will, touch base during the off season. He's on a little bit less. So I've got a rotation of guests. Speaking of which, Aaron, I got to get you on the show relatively soon. So be on the lookout for that. And then we just also launched a new YouTube channel. So just, you can find Believe in Falcons. Still kind of getting used to the whole video thing. So we're sorting out the kinks, but it's going to be a fun project to do throughout the summer. And I'm really excited to kind of get started on all of that. So we would love your support as we continue this journey. But thanks again, Aaron, for having me on. It's always so much fun to talk Falcons with you.
Absolutely. If you need any help on your thumbnails, I can help you out there, my friend.
I do. I need a lot of help on the thumbnails. It's a real thing.
There's a learning curve, guys. All right, guys, that is going to do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons. Appreciate Will McFadden for joining me. Tomorrow, we should be joined by Jonathan Davis of Locked On Longhorns to talk about Bijan Robinson. We might also have another guest. I have to confirm that schedule, so I don't want to promote that right now without that confirmation. But we're going to have a lot of guests on this podcast over the coming days. Several of the guests will be folks from the college side of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, to talk about the various players that the Falcons drafted in this past year's 2023 NFL draft. I'm about halfway through Bijan Robinson's 2022 film, so hopefully we'll be able to get that scouting report, probably not by the end of this week, but early next week. Is sort of my goal at this point in time. So look forward to that. The deep dive into Bijan Robinson and his skill set, but we'll take a deeper dive into Bijan Robinson and the person that he is on tomorrow's episode with Jonathan Davis of Locked On Longhorns. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. And guys, make sure you check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Keith Sanchez and Damian Parson if you're still trying to get the inside scoop on all the other 31 NFL teams draft in addition to the Atlanta Falcons. And of course, you can find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.